Transparent communication. When our motives and actions are misunderstood, we should be open and honest with God, ourselves, and those who are confused or even critical. Here's Gene to explain.
2 Corinthians 1:12. He says, "For our boast is this, the testimony of our conscience, that we have conducted ourselves in the world, and especially towards you, with God-given sincerity and purity, not by fleshly wisdom, but by God's grace." Now, if you look at the rest of this letter, which we will see, is that he is being criticized for being an individual that cannot be trusted. His sincerity is being questioned. Even his purity, evidently, is being questioned. And so Paul says, I've checked in with God on this and myself, and my conscience says I have conducted myself appropriately. These accusations are not true. So you see this openness here in this particular verse. Now, if you go to 15 through 18, he goes on and he says, "In this confidence, I planned to come to you first, so you could have a double benefit, or I could really be a blessing to you in more than one way, and then to go on to Macedonia with your help, because I would need your help financially to get there. And then my plan was to come to you again from Macedonia and be given a start by you on my journey to Judea," that is, on to Jerusalem. Now, here's a clue as to why he's writing this and what has happened. He says, "So when I planned this, was I irresponsible?" And by that he is simply saying, like I'm being accused of being. Or what I plan, do I plan in a purely human way? In other words, am I guilty of just doing what I want to do? Like I'm being accused? So that I say, yes, yes, and no, no, simultaneously, which he's been accused of. And then he says, in defense, as God is faithful, our message to you is not yes and no. And he goes on in verse 23 through 2:4 into the next chapter. He says, "Look, I call on God as a witness against me. My conscience is clear before God. Here's the reason I changed my mind. It was to spare you that I did not come to Corinth on the second time. Not that we have control of your faith, but we're workers with you for your joy, because you stand by faith. In fact, I made up my mind about this, not to come to you on another painful visit." Do you want to know why I changed my mind when I said I was going to come back? See, what happened was that when he made this visit to Corinth, this second visit, and confronted an individual, evidently, who was being supported in some kind of sinful activity that has affecting the whole church. And Paul confronted it. And there were a group of people that resisted it, and it was a very painful interaction. And so Paul evidently said, "Look, enough. I've got to go back to Ephesus, but I'll come again. We want to settle this issue." He said, "Okay." So he goes back to Ephesus. But when he gets back to Ephesus, he says, "I'm not going back. I've changed my mind." And one of the reasons he changed his mind was, I am not going to create more pain for them and myself right now. Now I decided not to come to you on another painful visit. For if I cause you pain, then who will cheer me other than the one that is hurt? In other words, this is a losing deal here. I wrote this very thing so that when I came, I wouldn't have pain from those who ought to give me joy. In other words, what I did, I wrote you a letter instead. And I wrote this letter so that when I came, I wouldn't have pain from those who ought to give me joy. Because I am confident about all of you that my joy is yours. And now notice, he said, for out of an extremely troubled and anguished heart, I wrote to you with many tears. Not that you should be hurt, but that you should know the abundant love I have for you. Now what happened was, as a result of that, and we'll see, there were false apostles who came in, evaluated that situation, said that Paul is vacillating, his yes and no are all mixed up, he really doesn't want to come, he doesn't have the courage to come and face us, and so they're criticizing him. And that was part of his suffering as well. That was part of the hurt and the pain that he was experiencing over this situation. He was being very transparent here in this whole situation in terms of why this was happening, why he made this decision, why he changed his mind. Now, let me read that principle again against the backdrop of that paragraph. When our motives and actions are misunderstood, which they were for Paul, we should be open and honest, which he was, with God. And I think there's evidence as you go along, you'll see even more. He went before God, he searched his own heart to check his conscience. Did I make the right decision? He concluded, yes, I did. My motives were right. He was honest with himself. He looked at his own heart. He looked at why he made that decision. And he was open with those who were confused about it, and even with those who were critical of the fact that he didn't return, and accused him of such. And why? Now the question is, why is persecution from those who claim to be believers, such as the Corinthians, even more painful than rejection from unbelievers, such as the pagans in Ephesus? Well, you expect it from pagans, but not from Christians, especially from people you've trusted, people you've loved. I remember, as I reflect back on the initial experience I shared with you of being falsely accused, a conspiracy against me, I took that seriously. I remember fasting for a whole week, searching my own heart and praying, Lord, what is wrong with me? Am I the kind of person they're saying these things about? Is this who I am? Don't I really know who I am? And I came out of the end of that week confident that in essence I knew who I was. I knew those things were not true. Didn't resolve the issue at that point, but I needed to take a look at myself. That was a good experience. And I needed to get feedback from other people. Is this who I am? I went to people, I said, is this who I am? I went to my wife, is this who I am? And of course she's subjective and loyal, but she said that's not who you are. And that was good news. My kids said the same thing. That's not who you are. This is not your problem. I needed that reassurance. I think Paul went through that process. And I think it was a good process for me. And the pain, however, was much more intense because it was from people that I'd mentored and people that I'd trusted who turned on me. And you know, that's exactly what happened to the Apostle Paul. These were the people he built his life into. He actually risked his life for them, and they turned on him. Now you understand his suffering. The suffering wasn't just what he experienced in Asia from the pagans. The suffering was also from the believers that he had led to Christ. And it was also from false apostles who probably weren't believers, and we'll meet them a little bit later on as we get into this letter, because Paul gets pretty specific about that.